Have you ever felt like you're being watched but didn't know why? For Elise, this feeling would lead to a terrifying discovery. She had just gone through a really messy breakup and had to move out. She found a studio apartment on the other side of town, but when she got there, she saw a bunch of things were left behind, including books, clothes, and a long mirror propped up against the wall in front of the bed. But when she called the landlord, he said that the previous renter didn't want them anymore, so Elise put everything in a bag to deal with later. She decided to keep the mirror though. She went to bed that night and woke up to soft rustling noises. She began to feel uneasy. She looked around and swore that she saw a long shadow move across her room. But maybe it was just the trees. She tried to ignore it, but all through the night she felt a pair of eyes on her. The next day she convinced herself she must have just been feeling anxious because it was her first night living alone. But she went to bed again and couldn't sleep. She heard the same rustling noises, opened her eyes, and saw a long shadow was now standing in front of her bed. She turned away for a second to turn the light on, but stumbled, and before she knew it, the shadow was gone. When she woke up, she took the bag of the previous renter's things and decided she didn't want the mirror either. She pushed it out of the way and found behind it was a huge hole that someone had dug to get to her. Have you ever met someone who wouldn't take no for an answer? Charles became obsessed with Jillian after she blew him off at the cafe. Charles was the type of man who couldn't accept that anyone might reject him, so he found Jillian's address from the phone book and went to her house. He knocked on the door many times until he heard Jillian's voice say, "Charles, what the heck are you doing?" Charles replied, "I don't get why you wouldn't go out with me. We had such a great conversation in the cafe." Jillian replied, "I already told you, you're just not my type. But if you really want to know what my type is, I can show you." Then she opened the door. Charles stepped in. "You see that door at the end of the hallway? Go in there and you'll see the type of man I like." Charles eagerly went in and saw a staircase leading down to the basement. What happened next would shock anyone. When he got to the bottom of the stairs, he smelled a horrible rotting smell. Then he saw that he was surrounded by 12 or 13 bodies nailed to the wall. All of them were headless. On the table against the wall, their heads were arranged in a row. Suddenly, Charles felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around and saw Jillian with an axe. Jillian swung the axe, and as Charles's head flew across the room, Jillian picked it up, looked it dead in the eye, and said, "Now you're my type." This is why you should listen to your roommate. Once there were two girls, Mary and Jane, who were best friends and roommates in college. They both had a huge exam coming up, but Mary got a text from her crush asking her to go to a party with him. Mary asked Jane to come with her, but she said that she couldn't because she wanted to study for the exam instead. Mary tried to convince Jane by saying she could just wake up early and study then, but Jane insisted on studying late at night, so Mary went alone. When Mary was at the party, she met up with some other friends who convinced her to stay at their place for the night. She agreed, but said that she had to go back to her room really quickly to get the keys that she forgot. Luckily, when Mary came back, the door was already slightly open. So she snuck in, grabbed her keys, and left the light off, not wanting to wake Jane. The next morning, Mary finally came back home. When she opened the door, she found Jane dead at her desk. Written on the wall in Jane's blood were the words, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?"
Storytime of how I found out that my mom was putting our dad's ashes in our food. Yep, our mom would put our dead dad's ashes in our dinner. So basically, after my dad died, my mom showed zero emotion. It's like she really didn't care at all. Like she kind of wanted it to happen. His death was like an unsolved case, and nobody knows how he actually died. And now that I get to think about it, it might have been my mom, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. And if it was her and she sees this video, I don't want to end up like him. Anyways, back to the story. So about a month after he died, she would always post a picture of me and my brother's dinner with the caption, "You'll always be with them." Literally every single night. And honestly, nobody really caught on. All the comments were like, we're praying, this and that. Until one day I was just sitting on the couch and I look over and my mom was pouring something into the mashed potatoes. So I go a little closer and I see her pouring the ashes of my dad into our mashed potatoes. Listen, this story only gets 10 times worse, so like for a part 2. Part 2 of how my mom was putting my dad's ashes in me and my brother's dinner. Continuing on with the story, after I see her literally pouring my dad's ashes into our mashed potatoes, and I mean, this lady literally sees me staring at her pouring the ashes into our mashed potatoes, and she like doesn't even say anything. I was just, a little shocked. So after that, I just kept quiet until after dinner, and I was mad at my brother that night, so I just let him eat the mashed potatoes. So after dinner, I went up to my mom and asked her why she was putting our dad's ashes in our food. And her exact words were, "Your father was a bad man. He wasn't meant to be here." I said, "What does that have to do with you putting his ashes in our dinner?" She goes, "It will just cleanse your soul. The witches told me to feed my children's father to them." Bishwe? I ended up telling my brother, but then me and him decided not to ever say anything ever again because we don't want her little spirits telling them to do the same thing with us, so